people getting logged in. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Technology, we love it. All right. Well, I think maybe I might start a little bit with just kind of some of the housekeeping elements. Since we are going to be recording this, just so that everybody knows. And I'd like to just say to everybody, welcome to our Idaho State University Homeland Security and Emergency Management Leadership Insights webinar series. And on behalf of ISU and our guest speaker today, thank you for joining us. I am Lori Holeen. I'm an associate professor at ISU, and I'm the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Program Director, and I will be the moderator for today's event. The Leadership Insights series brings together leaders and influencers in emergency management and Homeland Security to share their knowledge and perspectives with our ISU community. Now, before we get started, I'm going to share my screen, and I've got some wonderful, exciting slides that I'm sure everybody's going to be excited to be able to see. So today, as you all know, we are speaking with Judd Freed and really talking about, the ability to influence things from a local perspective in that position. I just wanted to also mention that we've got some upcoming opportunities for additional webinars. So we've got one on November 2nd, where we will be speaking with the former U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. And then we also will be speaking with the former Deputy Director of the Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Administration, Paul Ryan. So that one will be on November 14th. So just a few logistics about how the webinar is going to be structured. Everybody will be muted. It just makes for a little bit better clarity for audio. And we definitely encourage you to submit your questions. Go ahead and use the Q&A session. I will continue to check and look for questions that are coming in from the audience. So definitely encourage you to submit those. And we will try to work in as many of those questions as possible. So at this point in time, I'm very pleased to introduce you to our featured speaker for today's event. We're honored to have with us Judd Freed, who goes by Judd, who is part of our faculty team here at Idaho State University. Very fortunate to have you on the team. And Judd has 25 plus years working in emergency management, Homeland Security, community risk resilience, and operational continuity and research protection in the academic, private, and public sectors. For the past decade, he has served and continues to do so as Director of Emergency Management and Homeland Security for one of the nation's most densely populated large urban counties. He is a former International Association of Emergency Managers, IAEM president, and serves on the national level for various committees, providing policy guidance to our nation's top Homeland Security leaders. Thank you so much for being with us today, Judd.
Thanks, Lori, for having me. I appreciate it. It's always nice to talk to the boss.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a reminder, if you have a question that you would like to submit for Judd to answer, please feel free to use that Q&A form. And, Judd, to start this off, you have a very impressive career. You've worn, some different hats at different levels. And, since we have a lot of participants, people who are earning their degrees or working in that direction, or even still practitioners, could you maybe share how your career path evolved and how you got started?
Sure. Nothing I like better than talking about me. So a couple of things. First, I'm going to have to update my CV with you, I guess. I've actually now been with Ramsey for 20 years and 36 years in the field. And this was not my career choice, not even close. When I went as an undergrad, I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer or work in some kind of profession like that. Figured I would have a good high-paying job, get rich. and not get noticed too much. And I did sort of the opposite. I don't make much money, and it's incredibly high stress, and I get myself noticed. So what happened to me was real simple. When I was 17, I joined the volunteer fire department. I grew up just outside of New York City, about 11 miles north of the Bronx. We had a volunteer fire department in the suburban community I was in. I joined that department because it seemed like it would be cool. When I went to the University of Minnesota as an undergrad, they had an ambulance service there instead of a fire department. So I joined that ambulance service, learned all that good stuff. And the ambulance service was operated by something called the Department of Emergency Management. Never heard of them before, didn't know what it was, got involved, and was a regular student worker there. When I got out of college, I went back to New York. I worked as a part-time peace officer and a full-time paramedic for a couple of years, and gave that up to stay alive and marry my fiance, now wife, of 37 years, I think. And came back here to Minnesota and have been here ever since. Got a job originally in EMS, and then at the U of M, where I had worked on that ambulance, the training coordinator job opened in that emergency management department, and that was how I got involved with all this. By 9/11, I was director of emergency management and research asset protection. Was dealing with what's now called Homeland Security on a regular basis. Then, we were dealing with anti-research activists and terrorists. University had several attacks on our campus and lots of protests and things like that. And then one day this job opened up. It's not often that a position as director of a large urban county comes your way, and so I pounced on it and haven't looked back. So that's how I ended up where I am. Since then, I completed my master's degree at the Naval Postgraduate School Center for Homeland Defense and Security. I have a graduate certificate in Homeland Security Planning from the Joint Forces Staff College. I have a certificate in management as well from the Carlson School of Management, and a bunch of other trainings and things like that. I'm honored to still be director in my county, to be a past president of IAEM, and managed to get myself to be the chair of the Homeland Security subcommittee for the National Association of Counties. And I sit on the National Academies of Sciences Resilience Roundtable. And I say all that, by the way, not to impress everybody with how wonderful I am. That will become self-evident as we go on. But just because I'm the emergency manager in a county no one's ever heard of, in a state no one ever thinks of, and I've had the opportunity to do all of those things. And I think that's kind of what I'd like to talk a little bit about tonight.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing kind of that progression of your career, and having that first initial role as a coordinator and being on the EMS side. I think that's a great insight for people who are starting out in the profession, because there's lots of different entry points to get in. You touched on something talking about kind of the professionalism of the discipline of emergency management. You've talked a lot about some of your academics, and could you maybe talk a little bit about how you see that all fitting together, and also kind of talk a little bit more about that kind of policy level engagement? And I know you've been pretty involved in that particular, but if you could share some of your insights with us around that.
Yeah, the policy and politics end has really become my passion in my career. And so what basically happened was I got hurt when I was 16 years old playing football. And so I could no longer play high school football, which was my dream. So my parents made me do some extracurricular thing. And I figured the least strenuous thing I could do, since I couldn't be a football player like my big brother, is I would be on the debate team. And from being on the debate team, what it did is it taught me how to look at two different sides of an issue, because you got to be able to debate on both sides, depending on where you get picked. How to do a little bit of research about what you're going to talk about, and mostly how to talk to people. What's really weird about me is that I'm an incredibly shy person. I'm good in this situation. I'm great in front of a class or at a conference, but if I go to a party, I'm the guy who sits in the corner, sips my beer, and tries to look like I belong. And in fact, to the point where I intentionally put myself in places, particularly pre-COVID, where I'd have to talk to strangers, because that's an important skill. And second to learning that skill of how to talk, I am a firm believer that emergency management is its own profession. Public safety has lots of different roles in it. And we have a lot of emergency managers at the county level, for instance, who are sheriff's deputies or sheriffs, cops, firefighters, public works, public health, administration, you name it. And I think where people in our line of work go wrong in their ability to advance is that they look at this as other duties as assigned. And that's not the way I look at it. I look at it as being responsible for coordinating the public safety efforts for 600,000 residents. Every single day I work for them. I have bosses who sign paychecks, but I work for those 600,000 people. A lot of them don't agree with me on issues. A lot of them do. Some of them are legally in the United States. Some of them may be questionable. I don't know. None of that matters. If the tornado comes through or the blizzard hits, right? I'm responsible for working for their good. And if I'm going to take somebody's money, I'm going to do that job. And that's an intrinsic thing. I'm also kind of driven. I'm a pretty type A person when it comes to my work, and that pushed me into a leadership role, my own type A-ness. And Laura, you and I have talked. I'm not sure leadership, like the actual word, can be taught. I think that leadership is something that you learn how to do, but leadership, if you are looking to define it, it's really complex and multifaceted, but it involves the ability of an individual or a group even to guide and influence, right? Hopefully to inspire, but that word influence is a really big deal. And influencing people, the capacity to help affect their thoughts, actions, their behaviors, or in our line, their decisions and policy thing. That's something that someone can learn. And if you go onto the internet, right, people who can barely, inhale on their own are social media influencers on all kinds of things. And they just get on in front of a camera like this, and the only difference between them and me is they have hair. But in the political realm, influence is different, because the officials at the top are in and of themselves people with some power and some drive and some influence. And so I can't go to my elected officials, I can't go to Congress and tell them you must do these things because I think it's the right thing. I have to figure out how to manage them from below, how to convince them, how to figure out that what I'm saying makes some sense. And I've had the opportunity, Lori, to testify before Congress several times on emergency management related subjects. I testified before a committee on the impacts of EMP even. I've written testimony to the Senate. I helped her write a Minnesota law, and we got it passed. It took 7 years of hard work, but we got it passed. And I wrote that. It doesn't have my name anywhere on it, right? 10 years from now, no one's going to remember that, right? But it was important, and we got it done. And we got it done by the parts of policy analysis and here's the shameless plug. I teach 4410 at Idaho State, which is the politics, policy, civil rights, and leadership course. And it's the best course at Idaho State, the entire university, if I do say so myself. But it touches on something that I think is really important for an emergency manager. Anybody can go and take the EMI training and the state training courses. They're free. They're online, most of them. right? And literally anybody can take them. And so you can come and work in my agency. If I have a position, I'll take you and teach you, even more of how to do the nuts and bolts, fill out the forms. But if you want to grow in the profession, if you want to do something other than fill out forms for a living, then you have to learn to figure out what's happening in the world. You have to understand that, those problems that are out there, you have to figure out how do you identify what is a problem that's worth acting on. I have, things that I personally feel strongly about, but they're not national issues. My opinion doesn't matter on that so much. I mean, I vote, right? That's that. But I have to figure out how to take out of that whole universe of possible items, issues, right? Which ones are salient, right? Which ones matter to others and to me, and why? I have to figure those two things out. What are they, and why do they matter? This issue of we call it issue salience, right? So something happens, a focusing event, a tornado, a fire, a protest, a war overseas. Something happens that focuses our attention on something and makes that issue more important. Now we can get it into the agenda, and we can try and figure out not just what is the problem, but what might be done about it. Right? And that whole thing is the process of making policy, and I love that concept. The other thing that I learned real early on, so again, this is going to be me. I'm so wonderful, and I think I have a couple of friends on this call who do the same thing I do, right? And the same way. It's not just some guy from East Flyover, Minnesota, right? I know I have met one-on-one or two-on-one with every single Secretary of Homeland Security other than Tom Ridge. Right? Met them all. I know every former and the current administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Senior FEMA and government staff are my friends now. These are people that I pick up the phone and I call and I text with. And there's a whole lot of other people who I don't know personally, but because I have bothered to be involved, identifying not just what problems are, everybody does that, right? But who can make differences, who can make some assumptions, who can make some decisions that might change that. And I'm willing to advance that. So I was in a meeting today, and our state director opened it up for questions. She had some things that she wanted to say, and then she said, okay, so tell me what's on your mind. What's going on that you need? No one was willing to talk. So I did. I was on a meeting with NACO leadership, with some of the folks over at the U.S. House Committee that has oversight over emergency management, transportation and infrastructure committee, right? And when we paused, for the questions or comments, it was like crickets. So it ended up being me talking to some of these people, like literally just me, like a one-on-one conversation. And it isn't that I am great. I'm an emergency manager in a small county. Like I said, most of you will not. If I say I'm at Ramsey County, Minnesota, you won't find it on the map if you don't know where to look. Right? I'm from New York originally. My brother, I think, doesn't think we have running water. Right? It's flyover country, right? But I can walk into FEMA HQ and sit down and have a conversation with a dozen different people. Literally walk in without an appointment and do that. And I have other friends who do the same sort of thing. But there are thousands of us, right? So out of the roughly 180 million adults in America, right? There's 3,000 county emergency managers, right? There's 5 or 6 of us on the committee at the National Association of Counties, right? Just 5 or 6 of us. We literally set the agenda items up for policy for that organization, 5 or 6 of us. And that organization represents every county in America and has an amazing level of clout. I mean, they go and talk to the president of the United States, right? And when it comes to emergency management items, if you look at their list of policy items, every one of them has my name as either the sponsor or the co-sponsor, right? That's not because, again, I am brilliant. It's because I was willing. And so I would say to anybody who is a prospective student or current student here, if you want to go someplace and fill out forms, there's lots of places you can do that. Public safety isn't the best place to be just a form filler out, right? It takes some passion. You're not going to get rich. You're not going to get recognized. You're not going to get famous, right? No one's going to ask for my autograph ever. But I know what I've done. I know what me and my friends have done. My colleagues, we go out, we put ourselves forward, and when asked, we raise our hand and say, well, you were asking about this issue of mitigation or that issue of Homeland Security policy. Well, from people on the street, here's my opinion. Right? What happens in New York City is different than what happens in flyover country. And the folks in New York, they have the clout. They have the political ability to talk to everybody. Their emergency manager can talk to anybody they want to, right? So can I. And I'm in flyover country. I can be in the same meeting as their EM, have the same conversation, answer the same things. Folks from a couple of very, very large American counties in very populous states were selected to be in the first cohort of FEMA's Vanguard Fellowship, become a FEMA fellow, do research and talk with like literally in the White House, right? So was I, right? And I wasn't selected again because I am the smartest guy in the room. I am the most handsome guy, but the smartest guy in the room. We got folks on faculty who have many more degrees and done much more research than I have. But I know what I know, and I've taken the time to become a subject matter expert. I've learned what the subjects are. I've become an expert in those subjects, and I know the difference. Right? I have never coped with a hurricane. I know people who have. I have never coped with the deep water horizon spell. One of my oil spill. One of my best friends was the emergency manager in Mobile County. Right, and dealt with that on a regular basis. I've never been a member of the National Guard or a commanding officer of the National Guard. I have friends who are. So the things I don't know, I know who I can go and ask. And so if somebody in Congress wants an opinion on a particular piece of legislation, right, they get it to a small group of people because only a small group of people take the time. We put in our names. So if you don't like the way emergency management and Homeland Security are run in the United States, get involved. Become a
Jed, we have some folks who have a question. So Dallin, who is one of our graduate students, he asks, what do you see as the biggest barrier to entry into emergency management positions, and how can an HSEM master's student set themselves apart from the other applicants for the competitive jobs that are available?
So that you put your finger on what the first problem is. The first problem is that there aren't that many positions at any given time. There's only so many places, right? And most emergency management agencies in the United States are one person shop, and that person does multiple jobs. All right, so they're not hiring staff. So that's number one. Number two is, quite honestly, you're going to have the willingness to relocate. If you're in Idaho, for instance, right, there are so many jobs in Idaho. And by the way, you don't have to go into government to do emergency management, right? Every sector has an emergency management role, right? So broaden the scope of your search. I started out at a university protecting research facilities, right? That was my first thing, was to plan for those, right? So if you're willing to broaden your search, you can probably stay home. If you want to go into government emergency management, you may have to start by moving to Texas or New York or someplace like that where the jobs are. FEMA is almost always hiring. Go on to LinkedIn and look for emergency management jobs. 3/4 of them will be security guard jobs, but the other quarter, I'd say 15-20% of those are at FEMA, right? And that's going to mean moving someplace else sometimes. So those are kind of the big things. The differentiation, that's a huge one, and I'm really glad you asked that, because so I'm a hirer, right? I am officially a hiring entity for my county. That means that I write the job descriptions, I get them posted, and I'm the final interviewee. So here's the hints for work in government. I can't address work in the private sector. because I've never been there, right? In government, I will never see your resume unless you're one of the top 10 people on the list, right? So sending me your resume is not going to help. That you have to understand that. So when you look at the applications, and you usually put them online, right? Look at what they ask for, answer those questions, and in those answers, you can answer a question in a way that shows that you know what you're talking about and that you're willing to learn more. And it's that last thing that I think that you can separate. And then if you get that first interview, spend some time researching your prospective employer, right? We have everything we have is on the internet, right? And you would be amazed at how many people come to me and my colleagues' offices, and they have no idea what we do in my county, right? So my county is different from your county, right? It's different from any other county in Minnesota. You know, we're like I said, we're the 29th most densely populated county in the United States, and we're in Minnesota. Right. So know what that's all about. Learn about it a little bit. So when you're having the conversation with those first people, they'll understand that you've spent the time and the effort to learn about us. We want to feel like you want to work for us. And then, you know, when the interview comes, that's the time to just, you know, talk, be yourself, and let us know who you are. But I think those are the big things. And certainly the willingness to move is going to be the biggest way to get into the field.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned about being open to other entry points besides just government. You know, I got my start in working for a utility, working for a
Right.
drinking water utility. Every single community across the entire country has critical infrastructure that help provide that essential services. And if there's disruptions to those, you need emergency management folks to and security folks to protect the infrastructure. So a lot of times you just have to be kind of creative as how they think about defining that job in their mind and where to go to try to look at that. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Utilities, private industry, you know, Disney and Walmart all have emergency management agencies. Every utility hires emergency managers. I mean, every hospital. So broaden your scope. Don't, I mean, like, you know, I love working in local government, but don't limit yourself just to a county or a city or a particular county or a city as a starting job. You know, set yourself a goal, and that's probably the best way to do it.
And we had somebody else kind of also tag in there with another question about there are a lot of jobs are volunteer based, specifically for nonprofit organizations. And what do you think about that maybe as a way to start getting some experience?
Well, I love it. Experience is kind of the thing. So like for instance, you know, my agency is pretty small. We have 6 FTE and myself, right? And that's for a very large county, right? And the reality is that I almost always have to ask for some experience. I can almost never hire somebody with no experience at all, because I have to be able to turn them loose if other people go on vacation, right? It's a tough thing. If I had 30 employees, it'd be a whole different story. So if a person comes to me with experience, a few years of experience of actual doing emergency management or volunteer, now if you're just at the kitchen at the Salvation Army at the scene of a fire, I'm not sure that will help, right? We use those folks all the time, and they're incredibly valuable. Salvation Army, by the way, is my absolute favorite charity in the entire world. But if you are working with their disaster preparedness or the Red Cross disaster response group, or as a FEMA reservist or something like that, that is experience that will count absolutely on this job. 100%.
Okay, great. You know, I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit and see if you could maybe kind of focus on this. You know, we're seeing a lot of unprecedented violence in Israel right now. And, you know, what is your take on how emergency managers and security professionals, what should they know about the current conflicts and the attacks that are happening by Hamas?
So there's a lot of issues unpacked in there, and you know, I have my own opinions, and I have many friends in Israel, and so I have my own opinions, feelings, fears, all that good stuff. But as a professional, It impacts me in a couple of ways. First of all, the civilian Homeland Security role in my county is in my shop. I am the Homeland Security Director, right? So I have to be able to get information. The second thing is that my own personal preconceived, I think, justified belief systems about all these things doesn't matter professionally. We have to deal with the impacts that are going to come to our community. So, very broadly put, right, the purpose of a government is to provide the services necessary for people to not only live but to thrive. Right, and whatever they define that locally or statewide or nationally, that's sort of our purpose. If there are legal protests, for instance, First Amendment protected behaviors, right, they might impact the streets, things like that. If it's from the side I don't agree with, I'm going to be personally angry about it, right? But I've got to make sure that they can physically get there and that the other things are carried on. I live in the Twin Cities. I work in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, right? And 6.1 miles from my office, where George Floyd was murdered. Right? I am incredibly pro-cop. I will say this quite clearly: George Floyd was murdered. Right? We can have arguments about what else happened, but I'll say that I was a cop, pro-cop, work cops every day. It started with us. It spread worldwide. And if you weren't working in the field at that time, I can't explain what it's like to drive through literally 2 cities that are on fire. And I don't mean that figuratively. I mean, the skies were orange. 1,900 arson fires started within walking distance of each other. 1,900, largest arson investigation in America. We ended up with whole areas of our community that no longer had a place to buy food. I'm not talking supermarkets; those were gone. Right? Convenience stores were gone. You couldn't buy a Twinkie in a 2-mile radius of some of our communities. Right? So people who had nothing to do with the riot had no place to buy food. Call that a food desert. And many of them in those areas were incredibly poor and had no way to get food. Right? So people who had jobs, were doing things, were dependent on food banks that didn't yet exist. And now we have an environment where, as of today, the U.S. is militarily involved, right? U.S. Navy shot down 2 missiles coming from Yemen, apparently headed in at least the general direction of Israel. And so the Navy has fired shots, right? My son works in a field of the U.S. military where this is his area, right? So this is a thing that is happening. We're going to have it happen here. Today, we had protests all over the Twin Cities. Last Saturday, we had protests. The Saturday before, we had protests. So things are going on that impact the way we do our job. And we have to be aware of that. We have to be awake to that. We have to be willing to deal with the security implications to our residents. People on both sides right now, remember, I have a very strong feeling about one side, right? People on both sides are petrified. Scared people act irrationally very often. Okay. And so just knowing how one event can set fire literally to an entire city, we're now seeing events that have, impact to every aspect of the world. If Iran gets involved and we don't have oil, how do I fill my fire engines? Right? If they close the Straits of Hormuz or something happens to the Suez Canal, how do I get the radios that we need for my cops? Right? All of those things tie in. So thinking that world events don't impact us is wrong thinking for an emergency manager. Even if you don't deal with Homeland Security, just the safety and structure of your infrastructure is interconnected internationally. We saw that during COVID. We saw that post-COVID with this shortage of so many materials, right? We're at that stage again where that's going to happen. And then, of course, there's the other thing, right? There is real life fear and trauma for you as the emergency manager. I can tell you that the aftermath of George Floyd, one of my really dear friends, guy named Nick Crossley, is an emergency manager in another state. he and I talked literally every day during all of COVID, and particularly during that time. Right? There were periods of time where I thought I was going to lose it. Right? The trauma of seeing all these things happen, right? Emergency managers are affected by that as well. So, you know, taking care of yourself is the other part of this. What's happening in the world affects you whether you want it to or not. And so that's a really big issue for us as a profession. You know, we have a tendency to think that because we sit behind a desk most of the time, we're not like the firefighters or the paramedics who see the dead people. Their deaths matter to us, and they will get you. So that's a really important thing that I don't really think we do a great job of teaching in emergency management school. You know, you know, either undergraduate or at EMI or at any of those things. And I have a lot of friends who are, you know, working on this nationally as well. It is a policy issue for us in the EM world now. Long answer, but much more complex question even than that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that plays into this whole element of what type of threats does an emergency manager need to have the tools?
That's a really huge question. And so we are involved in all five now phases, right? Prevention as well. We may not. So as an example, one of the things that we do is we work with our school districts. We use a particular system for the in-school response to active violence and the reunification of students with families. If anybody wants to know which one I use, reach me offline. I'll be happy to tell you. We believe it's the best program out there. It's an amazing program, and we're out there working on these concepts every day, and that falls into that prevention range. I can show you the science. You want to see the science of it. You are 2,000 times more likely to be killed in a car accident than you are ever to have a student involved in a school shooting. That's the science, right? So I can tell you right now that don't plan for school violence. It's not going to happen, right? And I'd be scientifically correct, but I couldn't sell that message to my community, right? And I shouldn't sell that. So it's not just the numbers; it's the reality. So prevention is an important thing. The plans that go with it, and the preparedness, the response, the recovery, all of those things we collectively call the HIRA, the hazard identification and risk assessment. Those have been the traditional things for emergency management. Now we have the THIRA concept, right? And that adds a T to this. And quite honestly, as someone who teaches risk at another university, right? Hazard and threat are the exact same thing. They're synonyms. They're not different, but we differentiate them in the THIRA complex because these are human-caused intentional hazards, acts of terrorism. And the acts of terrorism, while we are more involved as emergency managers in the consequence, we're not going to go and investigate the incident. We're not going to go and arrest the incident. If somebody blows up a building and it collapses and it wipes out half of your downtown area, right? It's just a building collapse when you think about it. Not really, but when you think about it, it has the impacts to that city or that community's infrastructure, their systems, their services. So we're a part of that in emergency management. My thesis, in fact, in grad school was that I really think that it would be almost more appropriate to put the Homeland Security function under the emergency management function than the other way around, because we have to look at it as a holistic thing. We can't look at Homeland Security and those threats as just a law enforcement issue. They are the critical point on a lot of this, but there's a whole lot more that goes into it, and that falls to the emergency managers. So we are dealing with human-caused threats, natural threats, technological threats, and whatever your beliefs about climate happen to be, I can tell you that in the Twin Cities right now, we are experiencing higher than average temperatures during the summer, more than average snow during the winter, and these have impacts. I don't have to worry as the emergency manager about the cause, right? Whether it's anthropomorphic climate change or just a weather pattern. it is what's happening, and I have to plan for what that's going to be. And my weather service contacts tell me this is going to go on for a while. So we have to plan for it. I'll let my policy people and other agencies, they'll worry about whether we should drive green vehicles or not. Right? I'm going to worry about what do I do when it's 118-degree wet bulb temperature on the streets of St. Paul. Right. That's what I have to worry about as a emergency. How do I cope with that? What do I do if there's an ice storm in Maplewood, Minnesota, and I can't get ambulances to people's homes? Right? How do we cope with that? So the threats just keep growing, or they just, people keep inventing new ways to hurt ourselves, and then nature piles on. So it is
Yeah,
it's
there's
not a
always
field
that
that's going away.
adage. Yeah, there's always that adage that we can't plan for the actual disasters that we're going to be faced with, right? They're going to come from left field. They're going to be slightly different. They're going to take on a different component. So, the ability to be agile and to be able to do adequate assessments
Absolutely.
and then determine who the right people need to be able to partner with at the time that we start formulating the next steps.
Yeah, there are two terms I'm beginning to really not like in my field anymore. One is best practice, because it doesn't exist, right? What works in my county won't work in any place else, right? I can learn lessons. Lessons learned are important, but best practice, I don't like it anymore. And black swan events, right? I'm sorry, but in the spring of 2001, the class I was teaching at the University of Minnesota was discussing what was going to happen when Al Qaeda comes back and tries to blow up the World Trade Center and succeeds. We didn't know how it was going to happen. We knew it was going to happen. Right? It wasn't a black swan. Seattle is built next to an active volcano. Naples, Italy, is on the slopes of a volcano that's already wiped out two major cities in its history, right? So when those things blow up, it's not going to be a black swan. It's just going to be a really bad day. We're in the bad day business. That's the way I look at it. We're in the bad day business. We got to try and anticipate what we can. And most importantly, anticipate the consequences. Plan for the consequences rather than the cause. Then you can plan for the cause once you know how you're going to deal with the consequence. That's opinion, not scientific fact.
Yeah. Now, you talked a little bit about the value of associations, potentially their ability to do advocacy and, having that influence that can be leveraged in a particular way so that those voices are heard. Can you talk a little bit more also about how being involved in a professional association, how students, can or should get involved, and networking within those organizations to build skills and connections? And do you have any tips in how they should approach professionals to start building connections like that?
Yeah, so I guess I should have included part of this in the answer to the how to find that first job and break through. Right, networking matters more than I can possibly say. It's maybe an overused term, but I alluded to a little bit. Like, I know people who know how to handle every emergency. I don't know how to handle every emergency, right? So there's people I can reach out to and do. That's a lesson I've learned as an emergency manager, is don't be afraid to reach out. Well, as a student, that's where you've got to go as well. You've got to make some connections going forward. So, like, email your professor. If you're like, we teach asynchronous classes, right? Email me, right? Ask me questions, send me a text, set up a time to meet with me, that kind of a thing, right? Getting to know your professor is an easy way. I am a big proponent of the International Association of Emergency Managers, IAEM. Now, obviously, I ended up as president of the association, so you can take that with whatever grains of salt as you want. I also belong to the Metropolitan Area Emergency Managers and the Association of Minnesota Emergency Managers, and students can belong to those organizations as well. They're local and less expensive, right? IAEM is not free. I cannot stress. So quite honestly, if you don't have much money, join your state association in some way, shape, or form. Go to that conference if you can, even if it's just one day, and introduce yourself around. At first, people are going to think you're the weird guy, right, or the weird gal, right? But they're also, when the interview, didn't I meet you somewhere? And then you'll say, yeah, I'm the one who talked to you at the AMEN meeting or what have you, right? If you can manage it, join the international, as a student, the International Association of Emergency Managers, because they have student groups in every state, people who know what you know life experience wise, and they represent every area of interest you might have. You interested in nonprofits, they have a nonprofit caucus. Interested in higher ed, they have a higher ed. Utilities, there's a utilities, transportation, all these, there's groups there that do nothing but talk about that. You want to find out if there's jobs, you can talk to the person who runs the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, or one of the others, right? Or some big hospital out in Chicago, right? These people all belong to these organizations. The other thing that gives you is it gives you access to their government affairs group, right? And that government affairs group is a nice way to learn what the issues in the profession are. Now, you can concentrate on one area, right? But government affairs will talk about large, and your state organization will have this as well. They'll talk about some of the large things coming down. The governor is proposing that. The railroads are going to do this. There's new legislation about oil. This organization is working on, right? And when you learn those things, that's how you can start, figuring, oh, that one matters to me, right? And then you can go reach out and you can talk, but you can send an email to a Congress member or to a state legislator, or just to your county commissioner, or just your boss even, right? If I hire you to sharpen pencils, right, you better be a darn good pencil sharpener or you're getting fired. But if you're a really good pencil sharpener and you're also interested in how to stop nuclear holocaust, I'll let you work on nuclear holocaust too, right? You still have to sharpen the pencils. That's your primary job, right? But you can start to work on those other things. Same thing as a volunteer, right? We have volunteers in my organization whose passion is radio, right? That's what they want to do, right? So we facilitate that for them. So getting involved with an organization that is an organization that deals with emergency management and Homeland Security issues in the areas that matter to you, that's a great thing to be doing. And I can't stress how important it is. I can tell you that IAEM, which is the Minnesota Association, were absolutely critical to my career. That's how I met people. That's where I first went and saw that, hey, you can talk to a U.S. senator, right? The first time you meet a senator, you say, please meet your senator, you shake hands. Eventually, you end up in their office chatting about something that matters. These people, these leaders, they want your opinion. But if they don't hear your opinion, they're going to listen to other people's opinion. So learning how to contact them, there's other people who do that. Those people are typically in the association. So
yeah, I appreciate your feedback on that. I tell students quite often that you have to have that elevator pitch. You have to be prepared to, speak to somebody that you might bump into who may be in a position of influence. And what's important, you have to be well read, you have to understand the concepts before you start striking up those conversations. But actually engaging in those conversations or starting them is a very valuable skill to have. So appreciate your feedback on that.
I mean, how many forums have you read where from the students, right, it starts, I think that, right? And then what do we always ask? Why do you think that, right? What is it about it, right? So this is a good way. Those associations are a great way to learn the whys of stuff.
Yeah, great comment. So we have another question from one of our audience members. I see evidence of what I would describe as weaponized security concerns, essentially a manipulation of data for political gain. As an experienced emergency management professional, what strategies do you use to separate political rhetoric from actual security concerns?
That is the art. I think that's what makes me pretty good at my job now, is I've learned how to do some of that. So first thing I'm going to tell you, right, there's I'll get academic here. Tversky and Kahneman in 1979 came out with something that they called prospect theory, which is an economic theory, won them the Nobel Prize in economics, right? And it's Amos Tversky, and I can't remember what Kahneman's first name. Anyway, they came up with this theory, and the basic part of the theory is that people make decisions based on emotion, not fact, right? This is why people will spend $400 a year on a chance to either be hit by lightning or win $100 million, right? And out of that $100 million, it's really only going to be 40 million. And out of that 40 million, they're going to only get 20 million. But they'll spend $100 a year. Now, if I told them, hey, just give me $100 in cash right now, and I'll give you a chance to get hit by lightning or win $40 million, you'd look at me like I'm nuts. But if I told you it was the lottery, you'd play the lottery. People play the lottery every day, right? This is one example of how prospect theory works. Prospect theory works in all thought dynamics. We typically will respond on the emotional. Thus, if you want to try and get your issue raised up in the universe of agenda items to get somebody to discuss it, you try and make it sensationalized. This is what our politicians do all the time. And I'm not using politicians as a bad term here, right? It's part of the art is to make it matter. Remember, I used the term issue salience before, right? If I want that issue to be salient to the American public, they have to have a reason. Typically, that reason is fear. Fear is one of the strongest emotions there are. We typically will do that. There's a second theory out there called Error One, developed by a guy named Keeney. And that basically, very simplified, says that we're willing to trade off certain values for other values, such as safety, right? So if I'm willing to convince, if I'm able to convince you that if I up armor all of my law enforcement till they look like RoboCop, right? And we just shoot everybody who looks like they're causing a problem, I can make the world safe. Somewhere between kill them all and let anybody happen, there's a point where I can probably convince you we should be at, right? So then you get into issues like Homeland Security issues, where people on both sides of the political fence will sell a narrative because they want to influence your opinion. Sometimes it's because they want you to think of them first. Radio talk show hosts, podcasters, both sides, by the way, of the agenda, right? You put MSNBC on one channel, Fox News on the other, there are going to be people in there telling the truth, and there's going to be people out there telling outright lies, and they're going to couch it in a way that makes it entertainment and becomes social media influencers. And so being aware that people are trying to influence you is a critical thing. Understand that is the goal. The goal is to influence your opinion, right? For good or for ill. This is why when people are talking about, are foreign nations trying to influence our elections, the answer is yes, they are. Are they doing it the way they report it on NBC or Fox or CNN or whatever? I have no idea because I don't know what they're reporting. Second thing to do is look at sources from all sides, right? What happens, I think, with social media in particular, and particularly post-COVID, we isolated ourselves during COVID. We got to the point where the only people we were talking to were our good friends, right? And the only people we talked to on Facebook or Snapchat, Twitter or Instagram are the people who agree with us. We go on to Telegram and we download the videos from people who are uploading videos on my side, right? So I have feeds into my analysis stuff. I do a lot of analysis using online open source because while I have some access to less public information, shall we say, most of my work is done open source, right? With the current conflict in Israel, having a personal concern about it, right? I look at sources coming from from groups in Lebanon that support Hezbollah, groups that support Hamas, groups that support Israel, groups that support the United States. There's information out there on all sides. And if you gather that information together and kind of parse it, some of it has truth, some of it doesn't. Then you have to get down to what do you believe, right? And part of that is you got to suspend what's up here all the time because I know what I want to be true, right? So I have to just put that on hold long enough to look at how deep is the crater. How could that possibly have happened? What is the track record of the people telling me the story? And then last but not least is I just strain out all the extraneous people, right? If somebody isn't got a track record of providing valid information. I block them outright on all my social media platforms so they don't show up when I'm looking for sources. And that includes, by the way, some mainstream journalists. I block them out because I know what their point of view is and I don't need to hear it anymore, right? But you do have to, and it's really hard. You have to you have to apply multiple lenses and look at all sides in order to come anywhere near the truth. In the end, you're probably going to miss the mark, right? In the Homeland Security realm, right? We knew before 9/11 that international and national terrorism initiative, non-lugar diminishing act, was in place. We were funding the same things that are now funded in the UASI grants, the Urban Area Security Initiative grants. We were doing all of that way back when in the 80s, right? But as the book says, there was a failure of imagination of just how bad it could get, right? We had this idea that we were safe because there were ocean. Then they hit us a couple of times at the World Trade Center, but don't forget the fact that in between, an American citizen blew up the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, right? And killed babies, right? Can't forget that, right? That wasn't an international terrorist, that was a local guy, right? So we know these things can happen. They aren't black swans. And you have to, as a professional, put that aside. I vote the way I vote, right? I have opinions on lots of things. And my friends know that I will talk about my opinions all day, loudly and surely, right? And I was at one point that guy on Facebook who wrote 47 pages worth of stuff justifying why you should listen to me. And no one ever changed their mind because of what I wrote. So I don't post now. I read. Right. And if all you do, if you're right of center and all you do is look at one source, or you're left of center and all you do is look at one source, you will absolutely not get the truth. You will just hear what you wanted to hear when you went in, and you might as well not have looked at it. My friend and colleague here, Dave Brandon, he said the other day, Google is not research, right? It's an algorithm that puts the things it wants to put up front. But if I want to find what I want to find, I'll look it up on Google, and then I'll find just what I want to hear. And I can phrase the question. Same with ChatGPT, right? I can phrase that question so it'll tell me exactly what I want to hear. That's not true, but it's something I can do. So yeah, that's a really long-winded answer, and I apologize, but
No, I mean,
huge question.
It shows just so many different connection points of different topics and lots of loose threads that exist out there. I mean, you started to touch on feedback loops, you were talking about bias, you were talking about mental models and how we look for things that are going to reinforce the ideas that we already are acclimated to. So I think, and many of these are topics that, are centered around kind of that systems thinking, holistic kind of viewpoint. Absolutely. Where we do have to question our processing. So yeah, I definitely appreciate that feedback. I'm looking at the time, and we have had some great discussions. Judd, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Do you have any additional thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, or any advice for students out there?
Yeah, the real quick thing is first of all, always learn, right? Keep on learning. There weren't emergency management degrees back in the day. There were barely cards, right? Back in the days that I started, right? When you get out of here, keep reading, keep learning, and keep asking questions. Find people like me, and if you're if you're a student here at Idaho State, or if you're a student at any university, if you're a student here at Idaho State, reach out to your professors and ask them questions. We are in this job because we like to be able to talk about these things, right? And so, when you're writing your forum answers, or you're preparing a paper or whatever, right? Challenge us too, right? Find your facts, look them up, and then, please be persistent in your career search. Nothing drops into your lap. That isn't the way it works. You're going to have to work to get into the field. And once you're into the field, all you have to do is volunteer to do one step more. to end up having the opportunity to go out and have a beer with the secretary, to sit. I mean, a year and a half ago, I sat in the White House, like the actual White House itself, have pictures taken next to the beast, right? Like in the White House, having conversations with somebody from the National Security Council, the director of Homeland Security for the NSC, right? That's from asking questions. Right? That's all it is. Asking questions, volunteer, try and make a difference. If you can do those things, if you can ask questions, you can step up, right? And if you can try and make a difference, that's how you become successful in any career, whether it's emergency management, firefighting, or basket weaving. And it's also how you change things for the better. And so, yeah, that's my touchy-feely answer, but it's really true.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And, on behalf of Idaho State University and the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Program, we want to thank you, and thanks to our audience for, taking the time to join us and participating in today's conversation. And for anybody interested, if you're looking for more information about ISU, please visit our website at www.isu.edu/ESD. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks.